I never thought I'd wake up one morning and find someone else's coffee mug next to mine in the sink. But there it was, white ceramic with a small chip on the handle, sitting beside my usual chipped blue one like it had always belonged there. My name is Flynn Carter. I'm 25 years old, and I run a small bakery called Sweet Corner on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. When I say run, I mean everything. I bake, I clean, I manage the books, and some days I'm pretty sure I survive on nothing but flour dust and black coffee. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1K subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. The bakery sits squeezed between a hardware store and a laundromat, with mismatched tables and chairs I've collected over the years from yard sales and curb finds. Most mornings, the air smells like cinnamon rolls and sourdough, and that smell feels more like home to me than anywhere else ever has. I live in the apartment directly above the shop. The floors creak when you walk, the walls are thin enough to hear conversations from the street, and my kitchen is basically just an extension of the bakery downstairs. My life follows a rhythm that hasn't changed much in 3 years. I wake up at 4 in the morning when the city is still asleep and knead dough in the quiet darkness. By sunrise, the first batch is coming out of the ovens. By mid-afternoon, I'm closing up and dragging myself upstairs to crash early. No drama, no big dreams. Just steady, predictable days that feel safe. Romance was never part of the equation. I had a girlfriend once, back when I was 23. She said my early nights and flour-covered clothes made her feel like she came second to bread. Maybe she was right. Since then, I stayed alone, and honestly, I was fine with it. Mostly. My mom was the only one who thought otherwise. She never stopped reminding me that I should settle down, find someone, build a life beyond ovens and recipes. I always brushed it off until she called me that rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished glazing a batch of croissants when my phone buzzed. It was her, and her voice had that urgent edge that always meant trouble. "Flynn, honey, I need a favor." A big one. That's never a good sign. She explained that my older brother Rowan had a blind date set up. Rowan is 30, a successful lawyer, everything my mom loves to brag about at family dinners. But he'd come down with the flu, fever and chills and the whole deal. Canceling would make him look bad, and my mom was desperate to save face. She asked me to go in his place. Just sit there, be polite, explain he was sick. I groaned and stared at my flour-covered hands, already knowing I was trapped. Saying no to my mom has never been an option. So I agreed. I threw on a wrinkled button-up shirt that still had a faint streak of flour on the sleeve, grabbed a cheap bouquet of daisies from the corner store, and headed downtown. The meeting spot was a small cafe near the waterfront. By the time I arrived, I was 15 minutes late. The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped inside. The place smelled like espresso and warm pastries. Couples sat scattered around, lost in quiet conversations. Then I saw her. She sat alone at a corner table by the window, sipping from a white mug. Emma Bennett. She looked calm, composed, like she wasn't bothered by waiting. Her brown hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and her style was simple but confident. When she looked up, her eyes were sharp, observant, but there was something gentle behind them. I walked over feeling like an idiot holding daisies meant for someone else. Are you Emma?" I asked. She smiled politely. "Yes. You must be Rowan." I shook my head and rubbed the back of my neck. "Actually, no. I'm Flynn, his brother. Rowan's sick. The flu. Mom asked me to come explain, so you wouldn't think he stood you up." I held out the flowers awkwardly. "These are for you. Sorry about all this." She took them without hesitation. Her fingers brushed mine for just a second. Instead of disappointment, she raised an eyebrow and smiled. "Well," she said, "that's a first. A stand-in for a blind date. Sit down, Flynn. At least tell me why you're covered in flour." I laughed despite myself and pulled out the chair. I told her about my bakery, about getting caught mid-batch when my mom called. Her eyes lit up when I mentioned Sweet Corner. "I've been there," she said. "Your almond croissants are incredible." That caught me off guard. She introduced herself properly then. "Emma, a finance consultant downtown." We talked, and somehow it felt easy. No cuerpauses. No forced questions. I told her about ruining a wedding cake, once by mixing up salt and sugar. She laughed, a real laugh that filled the space between us. She told me about running along the river every morning to clear her head from work stress, about how numbers followed her even in her sleep. Rain tapped against the window as time slipped by unnoticed. Eventually, she glanced at her watch. Not rushed, just aware. "This was unexpected," she said softly. "But nice." I apologized again for Rowan. She waved it off. "Tell him to feel better. And Flynn, I might stop by your bakery sometime." I smiled. "Anytime. First croissants on me." Outside, she opened her umbrella and walked away, leaving me standing there in the drizzle with a strange warmth in my chest. As I walked back to Sweet Corner, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't love or anything dramatic, just a quiet feeling that maybe stepping into my brother's place hadn't been a mistake after all. The week after that rainy afternoon slipped by quietly, almost too quietly. I told myself the meeting with Emma was just a strange detour in my routine, nothing more. Then on a crisp Tuesday morning, just after sunrise, the bell above the bakery door chimed. I looked up from behind the counter, my hands dusted with flour, and there she was. Emma stood just inside the doorway, a light jacket over her arm, her hair loose this time. Sunlight filtered in behind her, and for a second, the whole room felt warmer. "Morning, Flynn," she said, like this was the most natural place in the world for her to be. "I figured I'd take you up on that croissant offer." I blinked, then smiled before I could stop myself. "You're in luck. Almond croissants just came out of the oven." I slid one onto a plate and added a mug of coffee. She leaned against the counter, watching me move around the small space like she'd known it forever. "Black coffee," she said. "No sugar." I raised an eyebrow. "Bold choice." She laughed softly. "I like things honest." She took a seat at the end of the counter, the spot where I usually kept my recipe notebook. It wasn't busy yet, and the quiet felt comfortable instead of awkward. We talked while I worked, about her job downtown, about how endless meetings drained her more than the numbers ever did. I compared it to baking on a bad day when one wrong measurement ruined everything. She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. She took a bite of the croissant and closed her eyes for a second. "You didn't lie," she said. "This is really good." We talked for almost half an hour before she glanced at the time and stood. She bought a small box of pastries for her office and waved as she left. "See you around," she said casually. And she did. The next Tuesday, she showed up again. This time earlier. She ordered the same thing and asked if she could sit and work for a bit. Said my bakery had better energy than her usual spot downtown. Soon, Tuesdays became our thing. She'd come in with her laptop, barely touching it, asking questions about bread shapes or why some dough needed more time than others. One morning, she asked if she could see the kitchen in the back. I handed her an apron, and she laughed while tying it on. I showed her how to knead dough, her movements careful and unsure at first. Without thinking, I guided her hands. The contact was brief, but it stayed with me longer than it should have. She kept coming back. Not just Tuesdays anymore. Sometimes Thursdays, sometimes just to say hi. She learned the names of my regulars. She joked with them like she belonged there. I learned more about her too. How she ran every morning along the river to clear her head. How her downtown penthouse felt more like a hotel than a home. How success didn't always feel the way people promised it would. One day she came in looking tired, the spark in her eyes dimmer than usual. "Rough day?" I asked. She nodded. "Work stuff. Just heavy." I didn't push, just told her she was always welcome to sit and breathe here for a while. She smiled like that meant more than she expected. That night, walking upstairs to my apartment, I realized I was looking forward to her visits more than anything else in my week. Then my brother Rowan showed up. He walked into the bakery in his sharp suit like he didn't quite belong. He mentioned the blind date. Mentioned Emma. His tone made my chest tighten. "She's impressive," he said. "Successful, driven. Not really bakery material." I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me longer than I wanted to admit. That same evening, my phone buzzed. "Emma. Want to go out tonight?" she texted. "Nothing fancy. Food trucks by the river. My treat." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. "Yes." That night felt different. Easy real. We laughed over bad pizza choices and shared ice cream like kids. We ended up back at the bakery after hours, sitting on the old couch in the back, talking deeper than we ever had. She opened up about work pressure, about feeling stuck in a life that looked perfect from the outside. I listened, really listened. Without thinking, I took her hand and told her she didn't have to be strong all the time. She squeezed my hand back. When I walked her to her car near midnight, my heart was pounding in a way it hadn't in years. As she drove away, one thought stayed with me. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. And I wasn't sure where it was leading, but I knew I wanted to find out. After that night by the river, nothing between Emma and me was spoken out loud, but everything felt different. The air in the bakery changed when she walked in. The quiet moments stretched longer. The smiles lingered. She started coming by more often. Some mornings she showed up before the rush, hair still damp from her run, cheeks flushed from the cold. Other days she came late in the afternoon when the display cases were half empty and the shop was calm. We fell into an easy rhythm. She helped behind the counter when it got busy, learning the register faster than I expected. Customers loved her. She remembered names, asked about families, laughed at jokes she'd probably heard a dozen times already. Sweet Corner felt fuller when she was there. But with that closeness came pressure. One afternoon she sat at the counter barely touching her coffee. Her usual spark was dim. Something wrong? I asked. She hesitated, then sighed. A coworker made a comment today. Asked why I spend so much time here with you. My stomach tightened. She said I could do better, Emma continued. That I was wasting time slumming it in a flour-dusted bakery. The words hit harder than I expected. I stayed quiet, letting her finish. I know it shouldn't matter, she said, but it made me think. Think about what? About us. Stories like this, about choosing what's real over what looks good, they need to reach people who understand. If this story means something to you, please subscribe. Help me prove that honest connection still matters. I wanted to say something reassuring, something confident, but doubt crept in. Rowan's voice echoed in my head. Different worlds, different futures. The outside noise didn't stop there. Regulars joked about her fancy life downtown. My mom called with gentle concern in her voice. Even when they meant well, it all fed the same question. Was I enough for her? We didn't argue. We didn't pull away completely either. But something shifted, like both of us were stepping carefully, afraid of breaking something fragile. Then one rainy Saturday morning, Emma texted early. Can I come by today? I want to learn how to bake something for your mom. I stared at the message, surprised, then smiled. She showed up in leggings and a soft hoodie carrying groceries. We decided on lemon bars. The kitchen filled with the smell of citrus and sugar as I walked her through the steps. She was terrible at first. Cracked eggs too hard. Spilled flour everywhere. We laughed as we cleaned up the mess together, kneeling on the floor, hands brushing. Then she went quiet. Flynn, she said softly. I've been thinking a lot. I looked at her, heart pounding. She talked about her penthouse, how empty it felt. About her job, how it drained her more than it fulfilled her. About how this place, this messy little bakery, felt real in a way nothing else did. Then she said it. I want to move in with you. The words hung in the air. Isterte hier, stunt. Move in? Emma, are you sure? This isn't glamorous. It's early mornings, tight spaces, flour everywhere. She nodded without hesitation. I know. That's why I want it. Fear rose in my chest. What if you regret it? I'm just a baker. She shook her head, eyes steady. You're the guy who shows up, who listens, who makes people happy with his hands. That's enough for me. I didn't know what to say, so I pulled her into a hug. Right there on the kitchen floor, lemon zest in the air, doubt melting into something warm and solid. That night, I lay awake upstairs, staring at the ceiling, realizing my quiet, predictable life was about to change forever. Emma didn't move in overnight. We took our time, even though the decision already felt real. Over the next few weeks, she started easing out of her downtown life. She listed her penthouse, cut back her hours at work, showed up at the bakery more often. Not as a visitor anymore, but like someone who belonged there. The day she finally arrived with her boxes, she stood at the bottom of the stairs, smiling like she was nervous and excited all at once. Ready for chaos? She asked. I laughed and carried the first box upstairs. The apartment felt different almost immediately. Not bigger, just fuller. Her shoes sat beside mine by the door. Her running jacket hung next to my apron. 2 coffee mugs in the sink instead of one. That first night, we ate takeout on the couch, knees touching, talking until we fell asleep right there. Mornings changed too. I still woke at 4, but now she stirred beside me, pulling on an old sweater to help downstairs. She learned fast. Measuring ingredients, glazing pastries, smiling at customers like she'd been doing it her whole life. She kept her finance job part-time, working from a small desk wedged between sacks of sugar and the old fridge. Best office view I've ever had. she'd say as the ovens hummed behind her. The bakery improved with her help. She suggested simple things. Posting daily specials online. Partnering with local offices. Nothing flashy, just smart. Sweet Corner started doing better. Enough to fix the leaky roof. Enough to breathe a little easier. Not everything was perfect. We argued sometimes about clutter, about schedules, about how many pastries were too many to experiment with in 1 week. Once after a batch burned during a busy morning, she snapped about the chaos. I looked at her and smiled. Yeah, but it's our chaos. She laughed, tension melting away, and pulled me into a hug right there in the kitchen. Family came around slowly. My mom watched us work together one afternoon and finally smiled. You two make a good team, she said softly. Rowan stopped by later, awkward but honest, admitting he'd been wrong. The comments from strangers faded. When people asked Emma if she missed her old life, she'd shrug and say, "No penthouse smells like fresh bread." Evenings became my favorite time. Walking around the neighborhood with her hand in mine, talking about nothing important, planning nothing urgent. One night after closing, we stood outside the bakery under the glowing sign. The air was cool, the street quiet. She leaned into me. Funny how that blind date turned out. I smiled. Best mistake I ever made. She looked up at me, eyes soft. Will we make it? I kissed her forehead and squeezed her hand. Every day, I said. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. If stories like this, about choosing real connection over perfect appearances, mean something to you, please subscribe. Help me prove my mother wrong. Help me show that these tales matter.